In the speculative evolution book called All Tomorrows by C.M. Kosemen, who is also known as Nemo Ramjet, humanity's distant descendants are reshaped across millions of years into wildly divergent post-human species after being genetically engineered by the godlike alien race called the Q. These forms range from tiny, almost vermin-like organisms and sessile colony-bound beings to aquatic leviathans, aerial gliders, and towering heavy-built giants, as each of them adapted to extreme planetary environments and radically different evolutionary pressures. Some retain echoes of recognizable humanity, while others are so transformed that they blur the line between animal, ecosystem, and even living architecture. In this size comparison video, we will explore the full spectrum of these post-human forms, from the smallest to the most massive macro-organic descendants. Let's get to it. The smallest are the parasites, which were a Q-engineered offshoot of the star people, created during the initial Q conquest as a punishment species. They were small, flattened humanoids that lived by attaching to other post-humans as hosts, feeding on their blood and tissues. Then next we have the symbiotes, which evolved from certain parasite subspecies millions of years after the Q left. These intelligent parasites form close biological partnerships with their hosts, enhancing senses or even offering protection in exchange for sustenance. Then we come to the colonials, which were among the most severely punished star people, transformed by the Q into tiny cuboid filter-feeding organisms which are forced to process Q waste while retaining full sapience. For 40 million years they endured as immobile, suffering biological bricks before they diversified into specialized colonial organisms after the Q vanished. Then we come to the worms, which were desert-dwelling, heavily modified descendants of humanity engineered by the Q to inhabit harsh subterranean ecosystems. They were initially stripped of sapience and they were reduced to simple burrowing creatures. They survived like this underground for millions of years, and as the planet cooled down long after the Q's departure, they slowly re-evolved intelligence. Next we come to the hand flappers, which were derived from the earlier flying human variant created by the Q, and they evolved after losing their ability to sustain flight. Their large wing-like hands became too specialized for fine manipulation, thus preventing tool use and complex technology. Then we come to the lopsiders, which were engineered by the Q to survive on a world with 36 times Earth's gravity, evolving flattened, asymmetrical bodies which are suited to extreme pressure and gravity. They regained sapience slowly and built an underground civilization with institutions, religion, and technology. The insectophagi were a Q-created post-human species derived from a star people colony. Though their original intended purpose is unknown, they survive as primitive insect eaters, equipped with protective facial plates, claws for breaking insect mounds, and long tongues for feeding like anteaters. Though they went extinct, their lineage continued through the sapient bug phasers. The prey were herbivorous descendants of one of the earliest star people colonies, reshaped by the Q alongside their predatory counterparts, the predators. They were lightly built bipeds with bird-like legs and reduced intelligence as compared to their hunters. After the Q's departure, they slowly evolved into more docile quadrupeds and were eventually domesticated by the killer folk. The subjects were the remade descendants of the bug phasers, spared by gravitals during the machine invasion but reshaped into genetically engineered tools and servants. Used as filters, recyclers, livestock, and experimental organisms, they endured as biological property within the machine empire. Then we come to the hedonists, which were engineered by the Q from a star people colony, and they were specifically made to serve as pampered pets on a paradise world of fruit-laden islands and nutrient-rich lakes. They were created during the Q occupation. They were designed for stunted intelligence, and physically they retained almost a humanoid form but had avian feet, beak-like mouths, and simplified minds. Next, the blind folk. They were transformed from star people who attempted to hide underground during the Q invasion, only to be reshaped into subterranean survivors. They adapted into vast cave ecosystems, and they evolved eyeless, mouse-like bodies with elongated tactile fingers, huge whiskers, mobile ears, and echolocation to navigate total darkness. Next, the lizard hunters were minimally altered descendants of the star people colony whose higher cognitive functions were deliberately suppressed by the Q. They lived on a predator-free world. They had no evolutionary pressure to redevelop intelligence, and hence they lost their sapience, but instinctively herded reptilian descendants of ancestral pet lizards. The predators were the carnivorous counterparts of the prey, modified by the Q on the same world as the prey. They had more intelligence and they were aggressive. They survived the Q's absence and gradually re-evolved sapiens, and their descendants became the killer folk. Now we come to the ruin haunters, which were descendants of the star people who survived the Q invasion on a devastated world scattered with the remains of ancient cities. Evolving millions of years later, after the Q's departure, they regained sapience and live amongst colossal ruins they barely understood, scavenging lost technology like relics of a forgotten age. Now we come to the star people, which were direct descendants of modern humanity who spread across the galaxy before the arrival of the Q. They were roughly human-sized and biologically enhanced, and they possessed advanced technology. They had interstellar travel and a unified civilization. Their defeat by the Q led to the creation of nearly all subsequent post-human species. The fingerfishers were post-human engineered by the Q, adapted to coastal or shallow marine environments. They possessed elongated, flexible fingers, which they used to probe into crevices and catch small sea creatures, functioning almost like living fishing tools. Though not initially sapient, their descendants would later re-evolve intelligence. The killer folk evolved from the predators of the prey world. Physically similar to their carnivorous ancestors, they retained fur, claws, ears, and smaller but functional saber teeth, with modified rotating digits that became grasping appendages for tool use. They became one of the first post-human species to rediscover interstellar contact. The spacers descended from the star people who successfully fled the Q by living inside hollowed-out asteroid generation ships in zero gravity. Over time, they genetically reshaped themselves for weightlessness, developing elongated limbs, hollow bones, hyper-flexible fingers, and even air jet propulsion for movement. Eventually, they evolved into the astromorphs. The bugfacers evolved from the insect-eating insectophagi after an atavistic resurgence of higher intelligence, which allowed tool use and eventual civilization. After surviving an alien invasion that left them deeply xenophobic, they eventually joined the Second Empire, only to be first attacked by the Gravels during the machine invasion. The nematolopes were engineered by the Q long ago from a star people colony to serve as living singers and memory archives. Over generations, they were deprived of agency and evolutionary pressure for higher cognition, and hence they gradually lost their sapience and regressed into herd-like animals with long necks. The snake people evolved from the subterranean worms, regaining intelligence comparable to their distant human ancestors. They developed a serpentine body plan which reflected their burrowing paths. As members of the Second Empire's later expansion wave, they contributed to the galactic civilization before being wiped out by the machinal Gravitals. The Satyriacs evolved from the hedonists, eventually redeveloping complex society. While they retain a broadly humanoid form, they develop a distinctive boneless muscular tail which formed from extended pelvic structures and fat deposits. They became one of the first spacefaring post-humans and co-founded the Second Empire of Man alongside the killer folk. So remember the lizard herders, which were a primitive post-human species that had reptiles for livestock? Well, the livestock became the sentient Saurosapiens, and over time the tables turned and the herders, lizard herders, became the livestock of the Saurosapiens. The asymmetric people evolved from the lopsiders after those high-gravity survivors bioengineered themselves to colonize lower-gravity worlds. Their once flattened bodies became more three-dimensional, with elongated grasping fingers and limbs and multiple shovel-like feet which are adapted for varied terrains. The Bone Crushers descended from the small decorative pets bred by the Q. After the Q vanished, most of their kind died out, but some evolved into larger terrestrial forms. One lineage grew into 3-meter-tall hairy humanoids with massive bone-breaking beaks and clawed thumbs, becoming sapient, at least limited sapiens, and forming a primitive medieval-level society. Then we come to the Gravels now, which were machine-based post-humans who abandoned biological forms entirely. Viewing organic beings as inferior rather than sentient life, they launched a machine invasion, exterminating nearly all other post-human civilizations. But ultimately they were defeated in the Astromorph Gravital War. The surviving Gravels were then transformed into the new machines. Now next we come to the Pterosapiens, which evolved from the sapient branch of the flyers that retained both flight and redeveloped intelligence. With prehensile claws functioning as hands and powerful high metabolism hearts which enable active flight, They built aerial cities resembling vast nesting areas and even rediscovered nuclear science. Now the terrestrials were a newly engineered species created by the victorious astromorphs after the Gravital War. They were designed to inhabit planetary environments under astromorph supervision. They possessed reinforced finger-derived limbs for walking and somewhat reduced though still advanced brains, and they function as overseers in the galactic order. Then the tool breeders evolved from aquatic descendants of humanity who, unable to use fire underwater, developed biotechnology instead of conventional tools. Even before fully regaining sapience, they domesticated marine organisms, eventually mastering advanced genetic engineering and actually grew structures and technology. Now the sail people evolved from the fingerfishers on an ocean-dominated world, developing wing-like membranes stretched out across elongated arms to sail across the sea rather than fly, with dual tongues that evolved from prey-catching organs into manipulators for tool use. They slowly regained intelligence and formed scattered warlike maritime tribes. Now we come to the astromorphs, which evolved from the zero-gravity spacers after they united their asteroid arcs into vast artificial habitats in deep space. After the Gravitals annihilated the Second Empire of Man, the astromorph descendants ultimately defeated them in a catastrophic war, reshaping the surviving Gravitals into new machines and repopulating the galaxy with posthumans. Now the Tempters were an engineered race by the Q from star people colonies as living ornaments, designed primarily for aesthetic and symbolic purposes rather than survival. They displayed extreme sexual dimorphism and a huge social structure. The females were immobile, beaked and cone-shaped organisms about 2 meters tall, with another 2 meters of body underground. Now we come to the final evolution of the astromorphs, which are known as the astromorph gods, as they became the most advanced branch of posthumans to ever be described in this work of speculative evolution. They wield science and knowledge on a hyper-advanced scale and can be seen as near omnipowerful. Now the Flyers were another Q-modified human lineage adapted for powered flight with pterosaur-like wings and monkey-like bodies. The defining trait was a star-shaped, highly efficient heart that supercharged oxygen circulation, which enabled sustained flight and later supporting the evolution of large brains in certain branches. Then we come to the modular people, which evolved from the colonials after millions of years of cooperative specialization, eventually reorganizing themselves into mobile, composite superorganisms. They stand over 5 meters tall when assembled, and they were made of countless smaller units that could detach, rearrange, and specialize for different tasks. The new machines were a transformed remnant of the Gravitals after their defeat by the astromorph descendants. Originally vastly intelligent machine intelligences responsible for the genocide of nearly all posthumans, the surviving Gravitals were reshaped and restrained by the victorious astromorphs into useful tools. Now we come to the top 3. The third biggest are the swimmers, which were aquatic descendants of humanity engineered by the Q, and they were adapted fully to marine environments where fire and metallurgy were impossible. They relied on biological domestication rather than traditional tools, and they gradually evolved into the tool breeders, mastering advanced genetic engineering later on as their primary form of technology. The second biggest are the striders, which were colossal posthumans engineered by the Q to inhabit a low-gravity moon. As such, they became towering, long-limbed humanoid herbivores with striped bodies and wattle-like growths on their heads, and they stood roughly as tall as the immense trees of their world. And the biggest are the titans, which were another Q-created lineage, enormous elephant-bodied beings that stood over 40 meters tall, which means 131 feet, and despite their massive cumbersome frames, they displayed notable intelligence and dexterity, using elongated lower limbs to manipulate objects and developing early agriculture, architecture, and myth-making as echoes of human culture resurfaced slowly on. And with that, we come to the end of this video. Now do hit the like button for support, and also for the ones holding their phones in their hands, well, you know the drill by now. Hit the hype option to push this content further to other viewers. Also subscribe to be a part of Legion Notebook. And till the next time, take care, boys.